Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for yet another episode this week of the Knicks Film School Podcast. If you missed episode 1 of that we released today, check it out. Me and Jeremy have a sophisticated discussion. I'll define it as a sophisticated discussion about the merits of one Tom Thibodeau. That's largely the episode. We also get into some other stuff here and there too. It was a lot of fun, and I'm happy we did it. And now we're going to talk trades because that's all anybody really cares about. Jeremy, hello again.
Hello again, John. I'm glad we can still be civil despite our battles, but it only makes our relationship grow stronger.
Try to think if I hated you, how would I take out my hatred in a way that would allow me to do this podcast still?
It's a good question.
I don't know either. Yeah. We're talking trades. And you are kind of going to be you are the captain now.
I'll be the guide.
You're the guide.
Guide you through the process.
Yes. So I don't really know what I have to say as far as a precursor before Jeremy. You just kind of get right into it. The trade deadline's Thursday. Again, for anybody who missed the other episode, I'll just say that we're doing a live stream during the trade deadline from 2 to 4, as well as the night before, Wednesday at 7. So check us out there too, where I'm sure we'll have more updated information. I'll also say that we are recording this as of right now at 6:15 p.m. There was a trade that happened a few hours ago, which I actually think, I don't want to say it impacted the Knicks, but Ricky Rubio's expiring contract was traded from Cleveland to Indiana for Karis LeVert Cleveland also traded some picks in that expiring contract. That was probably the number one contract I had my eye on in terms of looking at potential deals the Knicks could make. Obviously, the Knicks are not going to acquire that contract now. I don't really know. Is there anything else that we need to say before we just get right into it?
I think there's probably, two things. Okay. The first is we should talk about the new projection with the salary cap.
Yes. Quite a little jump.
Yes. For those of you who may not have seen it, the salary cap is actually going to be increasing by $2 million more than expected. It's now $121 million. What's fascinating about that, I mean, you could look at it as teams have a little bit more breathing room with the luxury taxes, but also it does affect the Knicks based on what we'll talk about next, which is the over the cap versus under the cap discussion. But the one thing I will say, the Knicks are benefiting in one way with the salary cap increasing, in that Julius Randle's contract is actually worth less, not from a monetary value, but a percentage. So for example, the contract's going to stay the same as we thought it would beforehand, but it is now a smaller percentage when compared with the salary cap, which then makes it even more accessible to move if that's what the Knicks wanted to do. Yes. And I think that's important as well to consider because if Julius Randle is making under 20% of the salary cap, which maybe 19.8%, that is pretty fascinating because again, it's this isn't a guy who's a max player. He's not 30%. He's a third of that. Or 2/3 of that.
2/3 of that, yeah.
So it's the third's difference. So that I think then further kind of helps Julius's case, not when he's playing poorly, but at least from a contract standpoint. But it also does impact Mitchell Robinson's cap hold. It's kind of negligible though. And then a little bit more, it impacts any first round pick because their cap holds will then be a little bit more too. But ultimately, it then leads us into this other discussion of if the Knicks should go over the cap or under the cap. Now, John, you and I, we've discussed at length my thoughts in terms of staying over the cap, I feel is a smart idea.
Yes.
And it seems like the Knicks may want to pivot and go under the cap.
Yes.
The thing about the salary cap is it's not a science, it's an art. And how you kind of navigate through
I agree with that.
I think is a key thing. My preference, of course, again, is for them to stay over the salary cap. But if they go back down and try to create cap space, I think it's fine as long as they get their man. And I think that the crux of our conversation, based on what we are probably seeing, is that this deadline may in many ways revolve around one Jalen Brunson. And if that's the case, and the Knicks do create cap space and sign him, no harm, no foul. But it's hard for me because if the Knicks go under and do not land Brunson, it takes me back to 2019, where the Knicks essentially did what they should not have done, which was they moved money out because they thought they had a bird in the hand, and they didn't. And that's my biggest hesitation, where it's like, don't make a move because then you look at it like, oh, well, we'll just get this player and it'll be fine. It's like, let's learn from our past mistakes and be cautious. Now, if the Knicks do open up cap space, I got to be honest, I'm feeling really good about the Knicks' chances at landing Jalen Brunson this summer. But even if they went over the cap, I'd still feel pretty good about it. Yeah. But especially under, it's like, you have to get this guy, because if you don't get this guy, you may have just kind of screwed yourself. And that's something you want to avoid. Well,
screwed yourself in the sense that you have not optimized the cap situation. It would not be ideal if they cleared space and it became obvious in the opening hours of free agency that they did. That's something that they wanted, whether it's Brunson or otherwise. We're assuming it's Brunson. They did not get. I think there is a significant difference. I know there are people out there listening to this who still believe and will go to their grave believing that if Kevin Durant did not tear his ACL or his Achilles, he'd be a Knick today. That's fair. We're not going to relitigate that today. What I will say, though, is it would seem that their intel and like the things that they're considering and what, on Jalen Brunson, who is again represented by Leon Rose's son, whose dad is a close confidant of not only Rose, but Tom Thibodeau. The connections are obviously endless. I think if they're sitting here and they're operating under the assumption that Brunson's going to come, Brunson's probably going to come. Like you said, don't need to clear the space now. You could always, draft night trades, right? And that gets into the ins and outs of the benefits of clearing the space, what it costs to clear the space, which I'm sure we're going to get into today.
Yes. And I kind of see a lot of these contracts. I think of them like fruit. And it's like, there is a maturation point for fruit where when it's ripe, when it's overripe, and when it isn't ripe yet. And my big thing with these contracts, my concern is that these contracts in many ways were built to ripen this summer. And so it's then the thought of what does it take to, what are you going to get with fruit that might not be ripe? Like, you hope that you don't have to give up too much. You also hope you get something back. I mean, if the Knicks traded a player in their rotation and they got expiring salary back and they even got a pick, I mean, that even if it's a second round pick, it's not ideal, right? You wanted that player to be worth more, because then you're basically saying we turned this player who we spent X amount on into like a second round pick. That's just not great.
It's not great. Business. It's not great asset management.
It's not. But if you're able to land the player that you want to land in the summer, then you live with it. But it's all about that. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to show you all something that I have created. And this is going to be, Andrew's going to feature it somewhere in the video description. I will probably tweet it out. But it's basically kind of, I guess you could call it a cheat sheet in some ways. So are we looking at a trade?
We are looking. I am looking at a lovely, I was going to say Excel spreadsheet. It is not. It's a Google Sheets. Google Sheets. So of all of the Knicks players, along with their contract status and current salary.
Yeah. So that's the first tab. And then we also have a tab for one about what the cap hits are going to look like next year. One about depth chart and the ages that the players are. This is when they're healthy, assuming it kind of shakes out that way. Looking at draft picks, draft rights, and then
this is my favorite tab.
Exceptions.
Draft
it's a very lonely one. That's why it's last, because it's
I was saying the draft rights page is my personal favorite.
It is. Yes.
I'm not going to try to pronounce any of these names.
That's okay. They exist. It's Rokas Jokubaitis and friends. We can just leave it at that.
Yes.
But I figured the best way to go about this, we kind of just go through a couple notes in terms of what the Knicks are making this year. But it's everything about this is so challenging, because it's like, well, if the Knicks are going to backtrack and go under the salary cap, I get it. If they're going to stay above it, I get it. But it's like, they could even do both. I don't know entirely why they would, unless it's sign and trade situation. But it's like they have to pick one direction, it would seem, right now, because if you can't trade expiring contracts past the deadline. So it'll be really fascinating for how they plan to go about it. But I thought the best way for us would be to go dissecting each player, not so much their, what they do, but it could even be their value. It could kind of be presenting different sides of how we should evaluate them. Yeah. And then we can always play around with the numbers that I've got with the cap hits over here. Because again, if we're thinking next year is important, then we need to play around with some numbers.
I think that's a good way to approach it. So that means, who are we starting with?
So I think it's only right to start with the two-way players. And it's very easy because all we have to say is that you can't trade two-way players.
No.
They're not allowed to be traded. So I know even the ESPN trade machine has like Luka Šamanić in there. Can't trade him. He's not salary that's available. He's on a
Congratulations, Jericho Sims. You have survived the trade deadline in New York.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, let's start with the salaries for this year, right? First would be Miles McBride, Deuce. He is on the minimum, $925,000. He is a restricted free agent in 2024. I don't know about you, John. I don't see him getting moved unless he is added as salary for a deal to make something work. By no means untouchable by any stretch. I just don't really know why the Knicks would move him, even if it weren't salary focused.
I think so too. I mean, I agree with that. I don't see them moving him. If the only way that I could see it, and again, I don't know if this is getting too much into the weeds already, but if the route that the Knicks want to go for a potential consolidation trade, in which they are sending off two players and bringing back one player, and that player is a good player, a desirable player, a player who's going to theoretically help them. Obviously, it's not really about this year anymore. It'd be more about next year. Perhaps Deuce would be an asset that would go back in that deal. But again, making that sort of trade as the Knicks sit, as we currently speak, 12th place in the Eastern Conference, I'm not sure that makes a ton of sense. So I would agree with you that Deuce is probably not going anywhere.
Perfect. Next gets a little bit more interesting. Mitchell Robinson. So Mitch is an unrestricted free agent this year. He's making $1.8 million. He could receive a 4-year, $55.6 million deal if the Knicks were to extend him. Why is this significant? Well, the Knicks could extend him today. However, if they choose to be under the salary cap, it makes no sense to re-sign Mitchell Robinson, because you're basically just saying, hey, all that money we cleared, well, now we're going to add like $11 million more to it. However much, it could be 10, it could be 12, whatever it is. You basically kind of you neutered the cap space that you just created for yourself, which is why if the Knicks plan to go over the cap, I think it does make sense to offer Mitchell Robinson an extension. But if they decide to go under the salary cap, it doesn't. Now, there was a report today by Ian Begley about Mitch and the Pistons having interest. The Pistons are, of course, one of 3 teams currently that has cap space, and significant cap space at that. Mitch is a fascinating topic for me.
Yeah, me too.
You have talked with Benji and Fred Katz, and I've been of the same mindset where it's like, there are a lot of things Mitch does really well, and I'd like to keep that player, especially based on how he's playing. But there are a few things that kind of gnaw at me. And it's not the shooting. That's not it. But
it's the least of my concerns with it.
But it's a part of it, in the sense of, if you have a lot of guys like RJ or even Randle, if you want them to kind of roll to the rim more, and you have Mitchell Robinson hanging out and teams know what he's up to, that is a factor. But the fascinating thing about Mitch is, unless you're bringing in someone, I hate saying repeal and replace, especially when I'm saying the name Mitch, but that's kind of how we have to operate here.
Wow.
We need to take care of the health that is this defense. But
wow.
Jeremy, you are a one of one.
Thank you.
Oh my God. That was amazing.
But here's the reality. If you look at how Cleveland operated when Brock Aller was in Cleveland,
yes,
they took calculated risks. And by calculated risks, it was locking players up. And I just can't help but wonder if, based on the way the Knicks are playing, not even on the court, I'm saying playing with negotiations and how they have treated Mitch, who they could have re-signed this past offseason and had more salary and stayed above the salary cap.
Well, and we should be specific, could have made a restricted free agent and then sat with no risk of losing him if they did not want to lose him.
Right. That would have been a Cleveland Cavalier move. Another Cleveland Cavalier move would have been extending Mitchell Robinson before he ever hits free agency. That's what they did. They did it with Jordan Clarkson. They did it with Larry Nance. Any of these, any of the players that were on Cleveland, that's how they navigated, because they knew at the end of the day, we're locking these guys in. We have full control. That's the reason why you argue in favor of the Randle deal, right? The reason why we're talking about Randle, or we will be, is because he's not going to be an expiring free agent. Now, some could say that's a problem. Others could say it's a benefit. To each their own. But I
had the beholder, yeah.
Right. But what I'll say with Mitch, and then I'll turn it over to you, is I think there is something to be said, of course, about selling high on a player. I know that we love the idea of selling high on a player, but when they're
it comes
performing well, we don't want to trade them, right?
Yeah.
And we love our players more than other teams love our players. And I don't want to say hate, but we sometimes loathe our own players more than other teams or other fan bases would loathe their players. And it's just been presented as a really fascinating situation, because you can go over the salary cap to re-sign Mitchell Robinson with his low cap hold. The question is, do the Knicks even want to go in that direction? And I'm not saying that Ian Begley is lying. I think he's certainly truthful in that sense.
He's not.
Right. I don't know if the Knicks are using Detroit as maybe a tactic or negotiation to say like, hey, this team's interested, or whatever it might be. But something about this, just, he could very easily stay, and I'll put the odds on it feeling like that's likely. But for some reason, for me, it just doesn't pass the smell test. And assuming there's a replacement in mind, I hope that even still, Mitchell Robinson is still on this team based on, again, how he's been playing. But I'd really understand where this is heading if it's to the point where they're looking to offload him.
I don't believe that the Knicks think that Mitchell Robinson is the starting center on the next great Knicks team. I don't think that they or anyone could rule out that he could potentially reach a level of being a starting center on a very, very, very good team. How should I phrase this? I think we've seen enough of Mitch to kind of know that certain issues with Mitch may always are going to be there. And yes, I'm talking about how he processes the game. Can you get around that stuff? Absolutely, you can. Does it mean he's a guy that they have to trade right now? Absolutely not. Does it mean he can't be here for the very long term and potentially not even be a starter? That's on the cards. I mean, you can, not many teams do it. You can pay a backup center around $10 million a year. It is feasible. Or maybe you can structure your team in a way where he is your nominal center, but he is not your closing lineup guy, but again, the ideal way to do that is more like, Golden State, where they're paying Kevon Looney. What are they've always paid him? They've always paid him very
$5 million.
Money. Yeah, exactly. That's like, and it's basically the guy like, we know we can put you out there for 25 minutes a night and really kind of not have to worry about it. And then when push comes to shove, we take you off and we go the way we want to go. Like, that's not really Mitch. Mitch is more tantalizing than that. Mitch has higher ceiling areas to his game where a guy like Kevon Looney does not. He also has, I believe, a lower floor. All this is to say, I would not be shocked either if something happened with Mitchell Robinson in the coming days, because there is still just enough bloom left on the rose that some team could look at it, and maybe that team is the Knicks. I don't know, but a team would look at it and be like, man, this is the best season of his career. And he says he's not fully there yet, conditioning wise. It's the what if. There's still a little what if, which is really rare for a fourth year player, for there to be some what if. There's some what if with Mitch. And I just wonder, what is some team willing to pay for the right to negotiate a contract with an extension with him right now. But again, if you're a cap space team, why are you giving up anything good to make that trade right now? Yes, you could give me reasons and whatnot. It's better to have, again, what is it? The bird in the hand and two in the bush. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't expect him to be traded, but again, it just goes back to like, who do I see this team long-term with the start? I see them, if they're really all in on RJ Barrett, and they're about as all in as I think you could be. He would work really well with a stretch five, and I'll lean on what Benji said in our last podcast for that. So I don't know. Wouldn't shock.
Well, the other benefit as well, if you are trading for Mitchell Robinson, you don't have to trade anything player-wise or money-wise of significance. You could trade the 15th man on your bench because it's a minimum salary. It's close enough. And then you could lock up Mitchell Robinson that day if you wanted to. That's the thought process that goes through your mind. And like, hey, if Detroit's interested, hypothetically, I don't want this guy on the open market. Mitch, we'll give you the full extension. You're locked in. And then that would just simply be the case.
There's a part of me that doesn't see the Knicks trading away their starting center. Which is not to say that they may not trade away their starting point guard, because we'll get into, but like, that's the part of it that like, he is not part of the problem, and for a team that has some very real problems, to trade away someone that has arguably been one of your better solutions to problems. I'm not sure if that part of it passes the spell test to me, which again, for the last 10 minutes discussion that we both just had, this is why he is a fascinating player and arguably the most fascinating guy to watch over the course of the next 5 days. 4 days.
And you can also sign and trade him in the summer if you wanted to.
You could do that too.
Base year compensation, which I have talked about before. I'll talk about it again, probably this summer, but it is something to keep in mind. Next, Quentin Grimes. Not
going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. It's not going to happen unless some star trade that made sense for the Knicks materialized.
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening.
Nope.
On Thursday. So we can kind of tuck him away. Similar probably be said about Emmanuel Quickley. Right. I'm with you. Obviously the stock is not quite as high.
No.
I guess it's, Quick's a restricted free agent in 2024, Grimes in 2025. With Quickley, I think it's the sort of thing where if you wanted to move him, it's just at a later date. It's not right now, unless, of course, you're bringing whoever else in. Again, we can't say that no one is untouchable, although one of these players is certainly starting to
get close.
I mean, listen, I wouldn't trade Kemba Walker if my life depended on it. But the point being, of course, that if you are the Knicks, you're like, well, I could trade Quickley. I could also wait. I could also keep him. I would err on the side of just wait a little bit more. And then if you wanted to flip him to do something for the right deal, consider it. But for right now, just stand pat with Quickley.
I think there's a 0% chance that Quentin Grimes is traded. I do not think that there's a 0% chance that Emmanuel Quickley is traded.
Agreed.
Just because I could see, again, similar to the conversation I just had about Mitch, some team looking at Quickley and being like, yeah, this guy's a dead-eye shooter. He's going to be a dead-eye shooter for a long time. He's slumping. Can I get him for less? Which is kind of what Zach Lowe intimated on his podcast a week or two ago when he said the vultures were circling. I don't think the Knicks would trade Quickley unless they were getting a piece back that they felt was could be a significant part of their present / future. Like a starting caliber, young to young-ish player. Right. And maybe, by the way, accomplish another goal or two in the trade. Again, I don't know. I'm like saying this and like there aren't a whole lot of players out there who fit that description who are actually going to be available at the deadline. We could think of maybe one or two, but so yeah, I don't think they're going to trade Quickley. Agreed.
Cam Reddish, Knicks acquired him for a first-round pick. He's a 2023 restricted free agent, making $4.6 million. Cannot be traded alongside another Knick for this deadline. Yeah, he can be traded in March, but the trade deadline's passed. So he's here to stay, in my mind, outside of a one-for-one type deal. I don't even know what it would be unless it were, a player in a similar position, or you're attaching a first-round pick to then get another player. But at that point, it's like, why do that? And you've just placed him on the bench, which is fine. I'm fine with parking him on the bench and reevaluating once the talent gets cleared up a little bit later. But it wouldn't make sense to then be like, well, we'll flip him now that we have lowered his value a bit more. I don't think it's a 0% chance it's getting traded, but I think it's probably under 1%.
Again, if we're ranking these, I think Mitch is the guy that we've mentioned so far that I would put at the highest likelihood of getting traded. And then Cam would go right above Grimes for me as the lowest. Although the next person we will mention is he's obviously the guy that we've been alluding to as the person who is untouchable. And that is, of course, Taj Gibson.
Of course. Now, here's the thing. So Taj's contract is non-guaranteed next year for $4.9 million. Or I'm sorry, it's $5.1 million next year. This year it's $4.9 million. I don't think Taj goes anywhere, but Keith Smith came onto this very podcast and he mentioned how the Knicks could have given him a team option, and that would have given Taj a de facto no trade clause. They didn't. They gave him a non-guaranteed second year, which means they can trade him if they want to.
And a team looking to potentially shed salary for next year might be interested in that.
Correct. So that's kind of my thought process here, where it's also like, if you're the Knicks and you feel like the last, almost 30 games, you're comfortable taking a bit of a dip, and you've got Taj Gibson, who is a great veteran, but also towards the end of his career. At what point do you then maybe approach Taj and say, do you want to contend for a championship? Do you want to go to a team that might give you a better chance than we are providing you? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Taj is comfortable here. I mean, after all, he's from here. He's just had a baby. Like there are reasons for why he would want to stay. He loves Tibbs. He's got a role here. But I also think about the fact that he himself, or it was reported that he turned down other options this summer to stay in New York. And you would hope that could stay the case, but the Knicks rewarded him by going over the salary cap with the room exception after the Derrick Rose signing, and paid Taj more than the veteran minimum. That was a really nice thing of them to do.
Yep.
But it also comes with the possibility that if they wanted to deal Taj and if he wanted to go somewhere, that exists.
Again, there are so many different trade scenarios, but unlike some of the other guys that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, trading Taj doesn't help the Knicks get under the cap. Trading all these other guys helps the Knicks get under the cap. Trading Taj means that there's a team that either really values Taj's veteran presence, which, whatever. I maybe there's that team out there, but more likely it's another team looking to cut costs. And I find it hard to see what's the trade that makes sense? Because the Knicks would theoretically be sending Taj out with somebody else who does have a guaranteed salary, and
maybe not,
potentially not, maybe not. But so you're saying they may just trade Taj by himself somewhere, but again, who are they getting?
But that's the thing. Maybe it's a player on a smaller contract that's expiring this year, and they get a second round pick out of it. That's the thing. It's maybe you're saying what you're saying is right. They aggregate Taj and another player, and then they bring back someone else. Different options they could move. Point being, of course, just Taj physically going somewhere. I just don't think we could take it off the table.
No, I don't think. Yes, I'll go ahead and I'll put Taj right in the middle quadrant in terms of tradability.
So what we have Mitch. For you, at least, Mitch. Quickley.
Oh, so here's my order. So most likely to least likely. And again, I don't think Mitchell Robinson is getting traded. I think that if you had to give me a gun to my head right now, I'd probably say there's 20% chance he gets traded, 15% chance he gets traded, something like that. But it would go Mitch, Quickley, Taj, Reddish, McBride, Reddish, Grimes. Okay. And the next guy that we're going to talk about, I'll say right now, Obi Toppin, probably goes for me he's not quite in the Grimes zone. Maybe in between Cam and maybe it's Grimes most untradeable, then Cam, then Obi. I really don't think Obi's going anywhere.
Me neither. And if anything, you could see the Knicks potentially opening up, a spot in the front court for the chance to give Obi more minutes, maybe. Yes. Obviously, Obi's not a spacing five. I don't even think you could necessarily call Obi a five, although he could play minutes there, right? Just spot minutes. But I just don't see the Knicks giving up on him either. I think they're going to keep trying to find him a role, and I think that's the right thing to do.
I will say though, like there has been a segment of the fan base who have kind of vocalized like, just trade him already. If you're going to play in 10 minutes a game, just trade him already. And I think there is a logic to that. I don't believe that is how they are thinking. I don't believe it's how they should be thinking. Because right now, again, I don't think the value is there in a trade. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some team looks at him and says, we're going to pay the premium to find out what he's going to be in 3 or 4 years. I don't see it.
Agreed. And next, RJ Barrett. I think we can start and end the conversation.
I was about to say, this is like
negative percent.
Yeah, when it's like I'll think of the old Peter King anecdote or something when it's Jerry Rice's name comes up in the Hall of Fame deliberation room. It's like Jerry Rice.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Next up,
gets interesting now.
Perhaps not as secure. The only question about this guy, is he going to be number one on my list, or is another player or two going to be ahead of him? He's going to be one or two, and that's Kemba Walker. So take it away on Kemba.
Yeah. Well, so Kemba signed to a 2nd-year contract. Again, I think that the way the Knicks probably operated was they were comfortable giving him the 2nd year because that was what his other contract would have been.
Yep.
I think they didn't do the team option because, again, his other contract didn't have a team option. I also think that the Knicks felt this would go a lot better than it did, and they could always trade him.
I think you're burying the lead there. I think they felt
this summer, and it has not worked out well. Again, I'm fine with the risk that they took. Yeah. It's just a matter of how they operate from here. And it goes then to the other point of like, well, what do you do with Kemba? Do you attach other salary to him? Do you not? And I just want to quickly, while we're doing it. So again, here's this chart for what everything is in terms of 2022-23 salary. So if I trade Kemba Walker for an expiring salary, for example, just delete that, not going to lose any roster charges or not going to have that apply. Suddenly you've got $10.6 million in salary, in cap space. And then if you're the Knicks, you're saying, well, we can use that and sign and trade a player, and that's how we get Jalen Brunson. That's probably the mindset, which then goes to show, like, really the Knicks don't have to trade Kemba Walker and Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks and other players that might be named. It might only just take one. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to go that direction. Kemba's fascinating to me based on the fact that there aren't a ton of teams that might want him because, again, I was operating under the assumption he would just go in the summer. I think that if the Knicks are looking to stay over the cap, the type of move where it's like, I know New Orleans is looking for a point guard. If they don't want to go the CJ McCollum route, doing something like Garrett Temple, whose contract is structured pretty much exactly the same as Rose, Noel, and Burks, in that the next year's guaranteed, the year after is non-guaranteed.
Yeah.
And then you take on, what is effectively a dead expiring contract and like Didi Louzada, because he's out for the year. And maybe you get a 2nd-round pick and you throw some money at New Orleans because they're pretty poor, or at least cheap. Like that's the sort of thing
poor
that I think,
and cheap.
Yes, exactly. Where you do it where it's like, we want to stay above the cap. Now, if you want to send out Kemba Walker for expiring money, one of the places I think that actually might make sense for him is Los Angeles, specifically the Clippers. And I don't think I would have thought about that if not for the fact that they made the trade that they did this past week, dealing Norman Powell and Eric Bledsoe. Norman Powell and
so
Robert Covington going to LA, and then Eric Bledsoe and Justice Winslow and one other piece I'm blanking on going to Keon Johnson going to Portland.
And we should say that they have Robert Covington, who is an expiring salary, although you would think that is a player that the Clippers like and want to keep around. Teams seem to like Robert Covington, or the idea of Robert Covington.
The idea, but they're in an interesting spot though, right? Because they already have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard when healthy. They also have Marcus Morris,
and they also have Norman Powell.
And they have Norman Powell.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's like, if I look at the Clippers and their roster, they really don't have a point guard. There was apparently a report that Reggie Jackson's not really a point guard. But
he kind of plays point guard for them.
He has to, because they don't have any other options. But again, I think his best role in the playoffs was as more of an off-ball guard. And the thing that's really interesting about the Clippers. So again, Covington can be traded. It's just he can't be aggregated with other salary, similar to with Cam Reddish. If you're the Knicks, just from this perspective, I'm not suggesting you keep Covington. I'm not even suggesting he goes to the Knicks. Maybe you work out a 3-team deal and Covington goes to the Thunder. And maybe there's a pick that's coming back to the Knicks in some manner, just a measly second rounder. The point here being, of course, that like if you're the Clippers and you're looking for point guard play, and if you're Steve Ballmer and you're comfortable spending as much money as you are because you're the richest owner and you want to build a contender, I think there's actually a lot of merit to this type of move. And the other thing to consider, of course, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have been injured, but this year, the Clippers are 20th in terms of pick and roll. And we've talked about before, how important Kemba Walker is as a pick and roll guard. Yeah. It hurts not having Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, two players who are great in the pick and roll. But then you kind of think about, like, if we load up and then when they come back, what are we able to do? You could have Kemba Walker run the second unit. You're trading him to a place where he's going to contend. There are all these good feelings going about, and you clear cap space, you get that second round pick. You kind of wipe your hands and you say, great, we've got some more flexibility. That, I think, is the type of move, if I'm the Knicks, I'm looking towards with Kemba.
I would still think it would be Serge Ibaka before Covington, just because it would make sense to me that Covington would be slightly more likely to be in LA's plans moving forward than Ibaka, who was obviously a little on the older side. It's just something about them acquiring Covington, who is, again, still theoretically a desirable player, a desirable veteran player. Like, I don't know. Ibaka passes.
You were right about the in theory, though. But I hear what you're saying about Ibaka.
Yeah, I think Ibaka, and Ibaka's a stretch five. Like, again, what does that matter for this season? Probably not a whole hell of a lot. But he is a guy that, again, once upon a time could. He doesn't take a lot of threes anymore, but once upon a time could stretch the floor and block a shot for you. I do want to address it because I know people saw it. There was a report from somebody, I don't know who it was, that
who was it, Mark? Who? Oh, that was a great moment. Shout out to Julius for that one.
That was good.
Thank you.
One of one, indeed. Somebody reported, erroneously, I should say, that Ish Smith for Kemba, or Ish Smith on like a second round pick or something, was discussed for Kemba Walker. It doesn't make sense. It's impossible under the cap. It would need to be Ish Smith and another salary. The Knicks could do that. They currently have an open roster spot because Ryan, I just call him aficionado. Yes, cigar aficionado / Ryan Arcidiacono is no longer a member of the Knicks, and they have a spot so they could take on, my guess it would be either not Jalen McDaniels. Jalen McDaniels, good. Vernon Carey or Nick Richards. Or I suppose JT Thor, whatever. One of Hornets' little salaries, and then combine that with Ish Smith, and then it makes it work under the cap with Kemba. I don't know. I guess maybe the Knicks are doing that. If they get a second round pick and a quasi interest, we know they liked Vernon Carey in the draft allegedly, but they also now have, they have Mitch, they have Noel, they have Jericho Sims. Like, would they add another center to that? Maybe. Yeah, and then the only other one there that I at least thought about, although I guess maybe I'm not thinking about it as much today after the trade that went down earlier, was Cleveland, just because Darius Garland has now. Is he playing today? I haven't checked, but he's been having some back issues, which apparently are perhaps maybe not serious, but like they're not nothing. Rajon Rondo is a particular sort of chap. Not necessarily he's kind of a square peg and the NBA is full of round holes. But now that they have traded Ricky Rubio, the only other obvious trade candidate potentially is Colin Sexton, which is like, what are the Knicks giving up in addition to Kemba Walker to get their hands on Colin Sexton? Because I imagine the Cleveland Cavs would want some pretty decent, and I'm not sure what that is, but then maybe I don't know, maybe that gets us back to like the Kemba and Quickley, it's like, again, you never know with this stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing with Sexton,
and although that wouldn't work under the cap, I think I just made a little bit too much money, but the Cavs also have like Kevin Pangos that they could throw into that deal.
Right. Yeah. I guess the other thing too, then it's like, if you're going to get someone who's not Jalen Brunson at the deadline, like a Colin Sexton, it makes no sense to then go under the salary cap.
Yes.
Because Colin Sexton's cap hold is going to be, I think, 17 million or so.
But you're
fine with that because you're basically committing to Colin Sexton.
Exactly. So, but again, you just verbalized something that I completely went over my head for a second, which is that you're not killing two birds with one stone there. It's one bird, one stone. You're just trying to get Colin Sexton. Has nothing at that point. Getting Kemba off your sheet is not a benefit anymore.
Right. And then you probably don't want to trim salary is all.
Yes, you probably don't want to trim salary. So yes. Which makes it, yeah. Anyway. Okay. We can move on. Do we need to talk about Kemba Walker? The last thing I just want to say on Kemba is like, there's a lot of people out there. I'm not even saying that this is wrong of people to feel this way or think this way. Like, Kemba just needs to be gone. I'm just telling everybody right now, just don't be shocked if you wake up the morning after the deadline and this guy's still here. You need a partner. You need a trade to make sense for two parties. They're not going to call up 29 other teams the day of the trade deadline and be like, shit, we got to get rid of this guy who's someone make us an offer. And then when nobody does, they're going to be like, okay, we'll take this. It's not going to happen.
I'll say this. If at least one of Kemba Walker and the next two names that we will talk about is not off of the team, I think we've got a big problem.
Yes, that's accurate.
I think that is
that's accurate.
There is something I probably should have talked about at the top. There is a layup opportunity for the Knicks. They can play this beautifully. It just depends on which direction they go and all that. But like, if you can trade one of those three guys, at least I should say one of those three players.
And we should say we're talking about Walker, Noel, and Burks.
Correct. That is, I think, how you can sell it easily to the fans. Look, this year wasn't what we want it to be. We know that. We're going to pivot. If you are as focused, Knicks front office, in the long term as it seems that you are, that is a way for you to win some brownie points with the fans. Again, I can get past the stumble this year. I'm totally fine with it. Yeah. Others maybe not, and that's fine. But how you sell the home stretch of this year is so important moving forward. And I think that's just something like that's the easiest thing they can do is just trade at least one of those guys.
Again, I think what you're saying is they're at a fork in the road. You could either I'm sorry, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but you could either just trade Burks, who has value and some team out there will want to take on, or you could go the other route and start mixing and matching combinations and this and that and the other thing and try to wipe salary off the books. And that is the other route. The option they cannot take is standing at the fork in the road and looking and just standing there. Which brings us to Nerlens Noel, who has done a lot of standing around this year because he's been on the fucking sidelines. Nerlens, well, take it away on Nerlens.
Well, no, I mean, I'd say that Nerlens Noel has caught a lot of heat, but that would be a lie because we can't often catch shit. So he's faced.
That's good. Listen,
here's the thing.
That's three gems in one episode. That's
anyway, great. Here's the thing about Nerlens. When he's healthy, he can be passable, right? And he has shown a track record of being healthy. He just hasn't done it this year. And like in games like the Lakers game, he's just looked completely out of it. But then you see games like the Bucks game, and he's been a very good stopper of Giannis when we've seen him. Speaking of the Bucks, I know they're floated a lot as a Nerlens destination. I don't really see it because he's not the type of five that they seem to like. You know, like Brook Lopez, they turned him into more of a floor spacer. Bobby Portis has been great as a floor spacer.
Can I just I think it would make sense if they thought that Brook might not be coming back. And it's just like a body who they can throw out there for 15 minutes a game. And I understand it's not going to space the floor, but you can, again, for it, or maybe 100%. It's just like the 10 non-Giannis minutes or something.
Right. But then if you're Milwaukee and you see Ibaka, like, wouldn't you consider also?
Yeah, there's probably a better option. Yeah.
Right. So Nerlens is a tricky situation because, again, like, his value is at its lowest point. And theoretically, you should not trade a player at his lowest point. But then you consider what I just talked about. At least one of these three should go. I think there's also something to be said of giving Jericho Sims minutes, even if he's not going to be as good of a player as Nerlens Noel might be. It's just, you have him available. There's a lot of season left. You might as well try it. I think if you're going the trade for non-expiring salary, it's a lot trickier with Nerlens. But I feel like one possible destination could be, and they're a little bit more mercurial in terms of how they handle their fives, but place like Sacramento, like you've got Tristan Thompson's expiring money there. Nerlens Noel is a better player than Tristan Thompson. That is without a doubt. And it's the sort of thing where if you're the Knicks and you say, all right, what about like Thompson in a second for Nerlens Noel? And you basically have what the Knicks have in some ways, which is like you have Rashawn Holmes and you have Nerlens Noel, and you got 48 minutes of rim protection. And that's essentially how you go about it. I don't know if they would do it. They might be fine just letting the money go off the books.
Yeah.
I don't know. But like, that's, if you're looking for like a player who's out of the rotation, you just want to get salary and you're not expecting a lot back from Nerlens Noel. Yeah, like, again, it doesn't even have to be the second round pick. Maybe you could even make an argument that the Kings are like, well, why should we take on more money? And I think it'd be valid. But if they feel Nerlens Noel actually has value, because you could also say like, hey, Nerlens was the 5 for a team that had the third best defense last year and made the playoffs, that then suffered talent discrepancy. You could talk yourself into it pretty easily. It's just harder to do when he's not playing because of health. But like, that's the type of move, if I'm the Knicks, I look for.
I don't see anyone who's going to look at Nerlens Noel as an asset. I don't see anyone who's going to look at Noel and say anything other than, okay, what are you giving us for the right to take on this contract? I just don't see it.
I'd feel better if it were the summer, I should add.
Yeah, 100%. It's so, to me, Nerlens was always the most likely attach him to Burks, and then you're going to get off a lot of money off your books. And then the Rubio trade happened today, and that takes Rubio's salary off the table, and there really isn't another obvious large-ish expiring salary out there to make that sort of deal. So then you have to figure out another way to get Nerlens off your books if you want. And again, I don't really see it. And then I go back to like, okay, so is Brock Aller really going to pay a tax to get off of a contract like Nerlens Noel? And that is, I have a tough time seeing it. But you never know. Listen, I've been surprised before. We'll see what happens. Like, here's one. Okay. I got one for you. Chicago, I would think that there's going to be something more they could do with Derek Jones and his expiring $9.7 million contract. They are a little thin at the center spot. After I think is Tony Bradley still backing up there, but like they've been rumored to be in the market for a center. I think I forget where I read it or who exactly what it was, but the impression I came away with was that maybe something a little bit better than Nerlens. I don't know. That's something. It's a possibility.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
To the next one. All right. Alec Burks again.
Yes.
Burks, to me, it's fascinating because I fully believe Ian Begley's report that the Knicks are not just going to willingly give Alec Burks away. I think that there is a very real possibility that the Knicks don't trade Alec Burks, that they trade Kemba Walker, that they slide Burks into the starting point guard role for the rest of the year. And then this summer, when they have created more cap space and need to do a sign and trade for Jalen Brunson, if that is the case, that Alec Burks would be the piece that helps make the math work. And then if you are Dallas, you say, well, we got some we got a quality player back. He's under contract. He's win now. We can support him. We can sell it to Luka. We can get Goran Dragic. We can do all like that is the type of move you can talk yourself into if you are the Mavs. And if we were talking about the Knicks in terms of just trading Alec Burks for over the cap purposes, I think an ideal one would have been would be trading him to Phoenix and getting Dario Saric back and maybe a couple seconds. And I think that in a perfect world is so ideal because Saric he's out of the rotation. You're not going to need to worry about him. Yeah. And if you wanted to flip him to a place like Dallas where, I think he would do pretty well there. I think he would enjoy it. His father has talked about how Saric does not want to play in colder climates. He's much more comfortable with a Croatian climate or similar to that.
God bless.
And that's I mean, we Croatia's a beautiful country. We all should be lucky
to
have
who amongst us,
of course. But like that mindset of like, oh no, we know that you and Tom Thibodeau don't like each other. You can just rehab elsewhere. You're not going to play, and then we could flip you eventually. But I don't think they go that route. And again, it's like maybe they do flip Alec Burks and some other salary for a bigger expiring contract. We could have talked about Rubio. There's the other thought process of Utah. I know people have mentioned the Jazz with Joe Ingles. The Jazz don't have anything really worth giving up that wouldn't be too much for them. Like I don't see them giving up a distant first round pick for this trade to go down. And they don't really have second round picks. They have 2
seconds to trade.
Right.
And so that's what you're getting.
Is that the move you want to make? I don't think it is.
And then we talked about it on the town hall the other night. There's the Dallas trade exception.
Right. You could trade him. You could trade any of these players up to where we have been at into Dallas's 10.6, 10.8, 10.9, something like that. Trade player exception that they got from Josh Richardson. That's certainly a possibility, but you could also you could do that over the summer with the thing that I was saying with the sign and trade with Jalen Brunson and then trading Alec Burks into Dallas's trade exception because that still will be there. I mean,
yes,
the timeline for that will be rapidly approaching, but you can make it work. So that's kind of, again, I'd like to see Alec Burks traded for a first round pick. I just don't see it happening. I'd like a protected first round pick. I just don't see that happening either. Do I think that he's worth a couple second round picks? Sure, maybe. But again, if he's more valuable this summer, I hate the Alec Burks experience with him at point guard because he's not a point guard. But your argument there is, well, we couldn't really do much better. We don't want to play Emmanuel Quickley because we don't trust him at point guard. At least we're giving Cam Reddish minutes. And it's not my favorite scenario, but it's one that I think is more realistic. And it's one I could be like, I don't love it, but I don't really hate it. It falls somewhere very squarely in the middle.
Can I just say, just for what it's worth, I think over the last 15 games of the season, maybe the last 20 games, but definitely the last 15 games, all of these kids that we all want these trades to happen so we could see these kids play, they're all playing. They're all going to play a ton. I would suspect whether they make these trades or not. The only other team I wanted to mention, the Lakers do have Kendrick Nunn. Kendrick Nunn has a $5 million player op, 5.2, I think, $5 million player option for next year. Not sure how crazy the Knicks would be about that. Considering he hasn't stepped foot on the court this year.
He's going to take it. That's the thing.
Yeah. They were rumored to be interested in Nunn this last summer. Maybe they still like him. I mean, who the hell knows? But that's a trade that works straight up, I believe, unless my math is off. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. I think we're almost done, especially since the next guy, I don't think we need to talk about Derrick Rose all that much.
I don't either. I don't think Derrick Rose is going anywhere.
Yeah.
I think the Knicks did not trade for him to then flip him a year later, especially in the first year of the contract. And you could say that about some of the other guys too, but I don't see Derrick Rose going anywhere. I think they desperately need him, just even from a development standpoint. Look how much better Quickley looks alongside Derrick Rose.
And it'll be
top end. And yeah. So
next guy, I would have talked myself into having the Ricky Rubio for Fournier discussion if, again, Rubio didn't get traded. Like, you look at LeVert, you look at Fournier. It's easy to say, like, oh, LeVert's definitely the better player. Like, they're different players. LeVert is more of a quote unquote bucket getter, right? He went for 42 or whatever he did a couple nights ago, or last night. He's also could be a little bit of a maddening player. But whatever. We don't have to talk about that because Rubio got traded. Do we like? I understand they've been, I guess, listening on Fournier, but it feels like if Fournier was traded, it would be in like a bigger deal, right?
I'll say what I've been saying before. Fournier's contract is the vehicle for a bigger contract. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a sort of thing where you could feasibly move him and get something else, but cap space isn't necessarily going to help you in that regard. You could get another contract, but I don't know what player is of a similar caliber that other teams would be willing to part with and has a similar contract. I think there is definitely, or there will soon be, a need next year probably, where the Knicks need to play Quentin Grimes more minutes. And maybe if they draft a player who is more of a 2-3, that they'll want to then move Fournier as well. I just don't know if the timing is right now. And I say that, I understand that I talked about Mitchell Robinson in the mindset of like, well, there's something to be said of selling high. And when you look at Evan Fournier and the tear that he's been on in the last 35 games or so, especially as a shooter, they're maddening things he does 100%. They're inconsistent moments, but it's the sort of thing where with Mitch, at least it was like, well, he's an unrestricted free agent. And with Fournier, you have some time to make a decision. So I'm leaning more against don't trade Fournier unless you get a great offer. And I don't see the Knicks getting a great offer. So you might as well just kind of keep him here, try to get that bigger fish, 2023 or so, and then use Evan as like, hey, like he's not the best player, but he's the salary and he is definitely a starting caliber guard, or like that sort of mindset.
Yeah, no, or like, 6 man on a really good team. I don't see the trade. I don't see the trade out there. If there was a trade out there that I saw and I was like, could you come up with stuff? Of course you come up with stuff, because you could always come up with stuff, right? I don't see the obvious, like, oh, perfect trade. There we go. Which leaves us with one. Just one. His name is Julius. Excuse me. Of course, I cough when we get to Julius. So what is there to say about Julius? We should say his bonuses now for next year are now unlikely bonuses, which also changes his cap number for next season. At least the tradable salary.
It should,
yeah. Because again, there's no rocket science to how the NBA determines if a bonus is likely or unlikely. If it happens in a season, it stays likely, or it goes to being likely. If it doesn't happen in a season, i.e., Julius Randle not making the All-Star team, goes to being unlikely. We've talked about it already so much. Like, gun to your head, because I think that like we could sit here for another hour, which we're not going to, talking about types of Julius Randle trades and like what they would look for and this and that. Do you think the organization mentally is in a place where they're like, we really want to move this guy? Or do you think that they are in a place, which I believe that they're in, and it's like, we'll move him, but it's going to be on our terms and we're going to really like what we get?
Yes, that's
the second one.
That is it. I understand why fans want to trade Julius Randle. You could probably sell me on it, but it's not even the fact that the Knicks just re-signed this guy and how could you trade him? Because it's a business. If you find the right deal, you do it. But it's the sort of thing where I feel like the Knicks only do it if another team is so comfortable with the idea of Julius Randle that they are willing to pay a premium for him. And I just don't think that's necessarily going to happen. And, like, again, the Kings are the perfect trade partner in so many different ways with what they have. But it's like, again, make my day, right? If you're the Knicks, make my day. What are you going to offer me where I feel comfortable getting rid of this player who is having a not great year, but had an all NBA caliber season, or not caliber. It was second team all NBA last year. And what sucks as well is we've criticized the shooting, of course, but we've also criticized the effort. We've criticized how he reacts and responds to criticism itself, all of these things. And then he has games like this week where you're like, maybe there's still something there. Maybe we can unlock it. And it feels maddening and frustrating. And yet you're like, again, I know it's a revenge game, and that's why he played so well and was national television with the Lakers. But maybe we can just wait, right? Because if we could still trade him on draft night where his cap number is exactly what it is right now, because he's not an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. Maybe we can deal him next year. The trade kicker, to me, it doesn't really mean much. He could always waive it. I don't think he's going to. He doesn't have to. But in terms of matching salary, you can get around that really easily. And again, if the salary cap next year rises and makes his contract feel even smaller, and then after that, the years go higher and higher and higher, and all of a sudden you're a team, you're like, yeah, I'm willing to invest like 15% of my salary cap into Julius Randle. You can talk yourself into it very easily. But I just don't know why, if you're the Knicks, you say this is so much of a problem that we can't even deal with it anymore and we have to kick him out. When the reality is it's like less than 30 games. You deal with it and then you assess. And hopefully it opens up other minutes for guys. And hopefully Julius, one of the other bonuses is playing 65 games and making the playoffs. Well, if, assuming the Knicks don't make the playoffs, then the 65 games part is moot. And if you're the Knicks, then you could just say like, yeah, Julius is hurt. This is what he's had all year. And it's the perfect cover. You can still criticize him for how he handled himself with the fans and the whole boo gate. But like that's your out. And that's your way to also play the younger guys. And I think that is another one of the layups that they could have.
You know what was telling to me was when he had, and I mentioned this, I think I tweeted this out, that when Julius had the dunk in the Laker game that put them up, I think 21, the entire bench just exploded. And that doesn't say everything. Maybe some guys on there still are like not really a fan of some of the stuff. I think this locker room is still behind him. I think the locker room still likes him by and large, with maybe one or two notable exceptions, which again, we didn't really get into in terms of like, could that be a motivating factor to maybe try a little extra hard to get a player or two out of here? They're going to have to be blown away by a deal. I think the only team, I shouldn't say the only team. I think the Kings are the most obvious team, because you could see them being like, well, he's a big, we'll pair him with the Halliburton, and boom, there's our 1-2. Makes a lot more sense than Fox. And if you're the Knicks, if you trade for Fox, and again, I think Fox is the only way they would do the deal, then all of a sudden cap space doesn't again need to become a priority because you've just traded for De'Aaron Fox and you don't necessarily need to sign Jalen Brunson anymore. At that point, I wonder, would there be another move? We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but then my eyes are even going more towards the possibility of a Miles Turner trade in the summertime. Potentially. Whatever. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's the only trade. I could see other teams sniffing around just to see, but I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if he was traded. I'll just say that.
I think the other thing as well with De'Aaron Fox, there was a radio snippet talking about from the Kings' perspective of De'Aaron Fox and Julius Randle. And it was so fascinating to me to see, and it's one person's opinion, but the idea where it's like, yeah, we're fine with De'Aaron Fox going. And then of course there's so many Knicks fans who are like, yes, De'Aaron Fox, bring him here. And it's just, again, it goes back to the mindset of the grass is always greener. Always. And I think that's just what we have to consider in terms of how you approach it. And if I'm the Knicks and I get De'Aaron Fox, then maybe to me, that is actually a better, player / vehicle to get another star. And you keep going up and up, but I don't think the Knicks want to necessarily play that game. I think, let me just say this. And in terms of De'Aaron Fox, I know there are a lot of people who really like him, and I'm not hating him.
I'm one of them.
Fine. You really like him?
I do like him a lot. I've always liked Fox. Yeah.
I just want to say this. I was curious. You know how I've talked about how much the Knicks seem to like guys who can pull up, especially from three?
Yeah. Yep.
There are 74 players this season that have taken at least 75 pull-up threes.
Oh, he's got to be dead last.
He is dead last by a significant portion. And I looked at the year beforehand thinking like, well, maybe it's, maybe it's a fluke. It's not. He was still ranking towards the bottom of the list. I think that was closer to like 83 players and he was like 73rd, something like that. Again, if you want to sell yourself on De'Aaron Fox, I can understand why. It's the speed, it's the finishing,
there's other stuff too.
Right.
He's got a devastating mid-range game too.
He does. Yeah. It's then the question of like, would you rather have Julius Randle and clear cap space for Jalen Brunson, or trade Julius Randle and get De'Aaron Fox? I think there's a very good argument for why the second option is maybe not the most savvy.
I think there is a personality difference between these two players. We've seen Julius's personality come out in maybe some not positive ways this year. Fox, I don't get the same sense is of that ilk. The stat I looked up was actually every NBA player who has taken at least 20 contested or threes that are defined as tight coverage. So I think it's 2 to 4 feet. He is last in that as well. He's 1 for 20 on contested threes this year for sterling 5% conversion rate. By the way, who's third best in the NBA again amongst guys who've taken at least 20 contested threes? Quentin Grimes. How about that? He's taken a lot of contested threes and he's made a lot of them. Anyway, we'll see. Look. This is not the last you'll hear about any of this stuff because, again, we are going live on Wednesday night, and that is going to be flipped into a podcast for you to hear on trade deadline morning and then trade deadline afternoon. We will also be going live from 2 to 4. And then, of course, you'll be able to hear that in podcast form. We turn everything into podcast. So if you're not able to join us live, it's totally okay. Unless did I say something wrong, Andrew? I saw you put your hands up.
That pod on Wednesday is going up immediately, by the way.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's not a Wednesday morning thing. Because last thing we need is we log off at 8:30 and then Randall gets traded at 8:45.
That's true.
So
yeah, that would be bad. Yes. Jeremy, tour de force by you. Anything else to add before we close up?
Andrew, anything for you? Are we good or no?
No, nothing for me. No. We're not going any. We're at a time restriction at this point. I have one Blue Wire thing on behalf of Knicks Film School. Congratulations to Blue Wire CEO Kevin Jones. He got engaged this weekend. So
cool.
Shout out to you, sir. And this should be a fun week. And good job with this, guys. I guess the only producer's corner question I'd have, if we have 30 seconds, we'll ask Jeremy the question that you asked me, John. Over under 1.5 trades the Knicks make.
I'll say
over. No, 1.5 players on
dealt,
the current
over
roster
players dealt
that are traded.
I'm going to say over, but not significantly over.
But you see at least 2 players that are currently on the roster not here after 3 o'clock on Thursday.
I'll say Kemba and Noel.
Noel.
Again, it wouldn't shock me, I should say, if one of them were Mitch.
Okay.
But I'll say one thing to close out. And this is on the Russell Westbrook conversation. One thing. Okay. So the only thing here, right? I've seen the trades. I understand the desire. First and foremost, for the Knicks perspective, if you're getting Russell Westbrook, he's not going to agree to a buyout. And if he does, it's not going to be significant enough where it creates cap space. Number 2, he doesn't really help you if he's playing. Number 3, do you really want to play hot potato with the grenade that could go off at any second? I personally do not. Number 4, the cap space you would gain from Russell Westbrook because he comes off the books in 2023 is moot, because you're probably going to have to give RJ Barrett what may very easily be a max contract. You're going to have to extend Cam Reddish. So all the money you were hoping for to gain, it's going to new purposes. Also forgot to mention earlier, technically speaking, Mitchell Robinson is continuous soup. So it just occurred to me that I had forgotten. But there's one other thing I want to mention, and it's the idea of the 2027 first round pick. Because I think that what fans have kind of done is they're thinking galaxy brain of when the Lakers are terrible and we'll get their pick and it'll be great. And here's the question that I want to ask both of you, or questions, I should say. Do you guys have any idea how much? Let me rephrase it. Do you know when the new TV deal kicks in?
Off the top of my head, no.
2025?
2025. What typically happens when there's a new TV deal?
More money.
Exactly. The salary cap rises. Would you like to take a guess as to how much money the Lakers currently have on their books in 2025?
Oh, they probably have no money.
Correct. They have $0.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. If you're a Knicks fan, you're thinking, well, they'll be terrible. Nothing is stopping a couple stars from going to LA, bringing other people with them. And all of a sudden, that 2027 first round pick that you thought is going to maybe be lottery because they'll be terrible might wind up being in the 20s.
Please,
and
God.
it's like, it's that sort of thought process where it's like, if you're going to Galaxy Brain it, just the Lakers could already do the same thing back to you.
Please God, don't trade for Russell Westbrook. That's the last thing that I'm going to say.
I'd rather rewatch the third quarter of last night's Laker game on a loop for all 4 quarters the rest of the season than watch Russell Westbrook play for the Knicks. That is
play 1 minute for the New York Knicks.
Exactly.
Okay. Again, Jeremy, that was good. Andrew, thank you. And of course, everybody out there who has been consuming all of this content, thank you so much. We appreciate you. If you like the show, don't forget, subscribe, rate, review, the whole thing helps us out. And we will talk to you again with another episode very soon.